Hey all, reacting to Marathon Was Bungie's Last Hope by Bellular News. I've done another video on this from someone else already, so let's dive into it.
As the days have rolled on, it's become clear that Marathon is not a Helldivers level success, but it certainly isn't a Concord-level failure. Now though, it will be the game that decides the fate of Bungie and of PlayStation's live service ambitions. That's a lot of pressure to put on a spiky, aggressive AAA game with deeply artistic ambitions and a fairly niche player base, but
I agree with the niche player base. I do think a lot at Bungie is riding on this, so I think that's a good take. Whether this is Sony's last foray into live service or whether they're sort of banking on this working is that seems a little bit aggressive, but broadly I think he's got something that there was a lot riding on this game, and I think that is true at the Bungie and the Sony level. And it was a lot to put on a game that does sit in a genre targeting a very niche audience. So, yeah.
With deeply artistic ambitions and a fairly niche player base. But it does have some fans. And that actually might be a problem for PlayStation. Let's make sure we know the stakes in this story. Marathon is the first new game from Bungie in a decade. It's a revival of the old Marathon IP, but instead of a Halo-esque single-player game, it's a hardcore multiplayer extraction shooter. It was meant for release last year, but reactions to the closed alpha and the reveal led PlayStation to delay the game, likely because it was a key part of their ever-dwindling live service lineup, and was supposed to give Bungie another revenue stream to help PlayStation's $3.6 billion US purchase of the studio worthwhile. And it's a game that didn't have a great development cycle either.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think when I look at Marathon last year, it didn't land the way they wanted, and so they felt like they had to put it back in the oven. Now, I've seen some things from Colin Neese, but not only Colin Neese, to speak to actually Marathon still had traction, it still had attention, but they did want to go dark because I think a lot of the attention that they got was starting to shift negative. And I actually really appreciate that they did that. I appreciate that they had a playtest. It didn't go great, and they adjusted. They made some shifts, pivoted away from where they had been going to somewhere else. Really well done in some ways to actually respond to that and not just sort of plow ahead anyway and hope everything works out. And from what I've heard, it is meaningfully better. I didn't play it last year. I did play the Server Slam this year. But so I don't have a direct, I didn't experience the prior and the latter, the former and the latter version of it. But for those that did, it does seem like the modern one is better. The one that came out now, be it the Server Slam or the live launch, it was a smoother experience. It was a better experience. More stuff going on, felt like a step up. So way to go. You're still always dealing with whatever can't be changed in a short amount of time, but it seems like they responded well, and kudos to Sony and Bungie to do that. I do think this was to try to set up that second revenue stream, and a very expensive acquisition of Bungie is obviously something that Sony's done and they have to deal with, and so obviously they want the studio to be profitable. Anyway, cool.
Purchase of the studio worthwhile. And it's a game that didn't have a great development cycle either. The layoffs over the last few years hit development teams of both Destiny and Marathon. Now, that all followed the original game director being fired in 2024 after a misconduct investigation, and after that, the game's direction also changed massively.
And it would. I didn't know that, actually. I don't know how I missed that. So, yeah, when you have your game director depart, that really throws a wrench in things. I mean, there's an argument that you could make that if that happens, you just cancel the game or go back to concept once you find a new game director or a new design director or something, because that is such a large impact on the direction, the vision for a game, the thing that everybody's moving towards. So having that late in the dev cycle, I knew that they had a rough cycle in other ways, and obviously, layoffs have been in a factor in some of this as well. But I also go, every AAA story about development to launch is always fraught with peril, always seems to have a lot of challenges, whether the game succeeds or fails. When the game fails, we hold those problems responsible. When it succeeds, it sort of succeeded in spite of the difficulty. And especially at Bungie, actually. I remember hearing some crazy stories about Destiny when that came out, and Halo was kind of infamous for just the mass amount of crunch that Halo and Halo 2 and Halo 3 and even Reach, like those, a lot of challenges on dev cycle side across everything. Maybe it's just because, games are really hard and they're trying to make a big, successful product. It's very difficult to do. So, but yeah, this is new data for me. So that's interesting. I don't know. I missed that. Yeah.
Conduct investigation, and after that, the game's direction also changed massively. Hero classes became a thing, rather than having granular customization. That's one thing for a start. You'll also find he's not even in the credits of the final game. Then there's visual artist Anti-Real, who is in the credits after she and Bungie reached a, quote, satisfactory agreement after her work had been plagiarized for early asset design, and ended up making it into the alpha, but of course was removed for launch. That's a lot. There's actually a lot more.
Yeah, that was the PR disaster that happened. It probably wasn't as bad in the dev side, except it slows everything down, it distracts everyone. And I do kind of appreciate how they handled some of that. It did seem like they tried to take ownership of it, and like mistakes do happen. And I know some people were like, well, yeah, it's the second time and all that stuff. But like, yeah, I do think it's like credit to Sony, credit to Bungie. It seems like they tried to do right by everybody involved. Hopefully it doesn't happen again, but this sort of thing, they made the best of it. And so, yeah, good response overall. Yes, a lot of drama. Yes, a lot of challenges seem to always be there in the bigger games. We'll see where he goes from here, but yeah.
It into the alpha, but of course was removed for launch. That's a lot. There's actually a lot more detailed how rough some of that stuff is, but it all sets up the stage for a game that had a hell of a lot to live up to. And that was before its fellow AAA extraction shooter Arc Raiders popped up and showed everyone that an extraction shooter could go truly huge. Huger than anything in that genre ever had before. Marathon is not Arc Raiders. Arc Raiders succeeded because it ended up being widely perceived as a bit of a PvE game, with cool moments that saw players banding together to take out bigger threats. And I mean that literally. The threats are goddamn ginormous, which is another thing that Arc Raiders has going for it. Just sheer visual spectacle and scale. Here's how they're different. Marathon's alpha sparked a lot of fears, including that it couldn't really work without proximity chat. Arc Raiders had shown that proximity chat's kind of essential to cooperation and storytelling, and for Marathon, well, now for the full release, there is proximity chat. Mostly, it's used to beg people for revives whenever downed, and of course being silently ignored by your killer. And the thing is that Marathon is hostile. Hostile in a way that a traditional extraction shooter like Tarkov or Hunt absolutely is as well. And that hostility extends to everything about the game.
Agree with that. And also that idea that proximity chat was an essential thing. I think Marathon's probably a better game for having had it. It's much more important for the PvE-focused, cooperative-oriented Arc Raiders, especially because of how they've sort of split the player base over time, than it is for Marathon. When I played the Server Slam, like often no one was talking on any side, and so the proximity chat didn't really matter that much. Or at least if they were talking, they weren't talking in a way that the proximity chat picked up. So, yeah, less important there, more important for Arc Raiders. But, it's one of those things where if you don't meet your table stakes expectations for a genre, that's going to cause you challenge. That's going to cause you trouble. And I think that's something that to recognize of, like, even if this doesn't necessarily add the same value to Marathon than it does to Arc Raiders or Tarkov even, it does help you be a game that players are willing to try because it seems like, okay, you understood that this was important, ironically, even if it perhaps wasn't as much. So
absolutely is as well. And that hostility extends to everything about the game. As a AAA, It is very weird. Compared to what the big AAA market's used to, there is not a sanded down edge in sight, and that is challenging for people. The menus are, in the words of one streamer, quote, Font slop, personally, I love them, but I can understand them being really overwhelming. And for the designer of said menus, font slop is, now something that they wear with pride. Then there's the onboarding experience. It just expects you to simply get in there and start playing. I very much assumed that this is a game where I'm just going to get murdered by other players all the time. I was kind of shocked the first time I got downed by an NPC. They actually hit hard, and at times they can be really aggressive. So lethality is high, NPCs are aggressive, players are aggressive, and it can at times play more like a deathmatch with rewards and huge punishment. But perhaps most faithfully for a match.
Yeah, I also want to say that, like, when the world is lethal, one of the things for me that was surprising, there's NPCs for sure, but it's just, you're walking through and like a plant suddenly kicks up a bunch of poison. That could down you if you didn't have health or if you'd just gotten out of a gunfight. Even with AI, and the lack of heals being readily available, you have to carry a lot of them if you get in a lot of gunfights, because you just get chipped out by a lot of the AI. But just like little things, like the whole thing is very dangerous. And he also hit that idea of there wasn't they don't give you a nice, smooth tutorial getting in. Now, I don't know if they do a little bit, and I think the first time or two you probably play, there's probably not much chance of you encountering other players, and there's like sort of the intro zone, like the beginner zone that they have. But it doesn't hold your hand a ton. I will say it does it more than Tarkov used to, but not a ton. And that is part of the experience of just, it's difficult, and it's difficult from the very get-go. I've also been downed by NPCs in this game. They can be very, very dangerous. So yeah, especially if you're thinking about something else, or like fighting a team and they hit you from the side or behind or something. It's not just a really simple like, oh, pop, pop, get rid of them and then go back to the fight. It's, oh shoot, I'm gonna have to expend time, energy, ammunition, shields, and health potentially to fight this off and then get back to what I'm doing, and that puts me in a very difficult position. So anyway, yep. Agreeing with him, I think it makes the game spiky, which is probably good. Some of those things I didn't like, but I know a lot of people that did.
Deathmatch with rewards and huge punishment. But perhaps most faithfully for a mass market game, it doesn't give you access to the most interesting systems and maps until you have battered yourself against it for hours. And compared to those more interesting maps and systems, the very first map that you drop into is not as exciting, not as interesting. Now, as you do batter yourself against this game for hours, you do start realizing that the game kinda caters to every player's objectives at once, but in the form of chaos, essentially. And what I mean there is that someone may be taking on a difficult PvE enemy to progress the scavenging faction called Traxxas. Someone else may be watching, waiting for easy PvP kills to please Arachne, who are the death cult. You see, the systems, by design, make players unpredictable, all because players will be targeting different goals. Essentially, it's unclear what the other person's incentives are, which leads to a lot of the fear and suspicion, which, at best, can make this game play oddly close to an Alien Isolation, where you are just terrified the whole time. That's not something that everybody wants. And then there's another thing. How it looks. It is all quite garishly bright.
He hit on something that I think is one of the challenges, is that this game doesn't play very well as a solo, because while everybody else might have some random objective you don't understand, and so it makes them less predictable, your own team also has some random objective and makes them less predictable. And so it is not uncommon for you to start a mission, have nobody in voice chat, and then have to try to okay, how do I go get the quest I picked done? Because the quests of the other people are very different. It may take them to other parts of the map. I wish they'd done more work there to try to line that up. It seems like it was a deliberate choice not to do that, which I think is that's an interesting one. And I think that's actually one of the things that pushes some number of people away from this game, because it is hard to have a casual team. The roles aren't well defined in these sorts of things. So you get in and you're just matched with other people, and what classes they are, you don't necessarily know. It feels very haphazard in some ways when it comes to playing, and that's not great. It's because the alternative is play by yourself or play solo, and then you feel very weak if you're against any sort of organized enemy group. So there's this endless, like, okay, I'm sacrificing my objective for everybody else's objective potentially, or I'm asking them to sacrifice for mine, unless if we happen to be two people who needed to go to the same area of the map. And that feels bad. I had a run with someone where I needed to go to this one very dangerous part of the map that everybody's trying to go to, probably because there's a lot of quests there. And the friend I was playing with wanted to go somewhere else, and he just kept being like, "No, it's fine. I'm not that worried about it." And he wasn't. And he was great. But part of me was like, "Man, we keep going and trying to get my mission done, and then every time we fail, because we were trying to get into gunfights too and things like that. It's like, well, we're going to go back there, I guess." And it feels, it feels a little bit oppressive. So anyway,
does this sound familiar? You're in a leadership role at a game studio. Everyone is busy working. No one has any time. But the actual game itself isn't in a good spot. Maybe it's the tech. Maybe it's the lack of a validated prototype. Maybe it's that every person seems to have a different idea about what we're trying to build. But you've got a job. There are reports to send, meetings to schedule and facilitate, the occasional season of performance reviews to go through. And everyone is always so busy. When you step back, it makes you wonder if everyone is just going to keep slowly walking towards the abyss until the project or game fails. Is this what it means to be a leader in games? In tech? To endlessly repeat the same sequence of meetings without really moving the needle? To spend hours trying to get Jira tickets and dashboards where they should be? To pretend that everything is fine when you know deep down it really isn't? It doesn't have to be this way. You can make a difference. You can help your team and game succeed, but sometimes you need a bit of help to get there. I've started a game dev leadership accelerator. It aims to level up leaders who see opportunities to make a difference but don't know how to capitalize on them. We'll walk through what it means to lead well and give you tools to understand your organization's challenges and implement changes to overcome them. Game dev is hard. Knowing how to lead will give you an edge. It will still be hard, but you'll be ready to tackle it. If you're interested, let me know below. Hit the link. I hope to see you in the accelerator because I believe better leaders will help teams make better games, and I look forward to someday playing what you create. Yeah.
Once. And then there's another thing. How it looks. It is all quite garishly bright. There are hyper-stylized animations and cutscenes, which I'll absolutely say I love. I love the style, the sound of this game, the feeling of it, but I understand why others may not. It's certainly committing hard to what it wants to do in a way that will put people off. Now here's the thing. I actually like it when art's off-putting. I like it when art is so good for some people that others just can't hack it, right? I like that. I like things being different. I like uniqueness. And that may be great for me. It might be great for other people. It might be great for the designers at Bungie. But it may not be amazing for Marathon as a AAA product with AAA expenses, a studio like Bungie, and a funder like PlayStation. The game itself...
Agree. I'm also a big fan of the fact that they made risky calls. They made risky bets here. They didn't go for something very safe when it came to the art style. They did swing big, and I think he nails it though, which is like, okay, well, you swung big, you went for an art style that might get on a lot of people's nerves or a lot of people might respond negatively to. Now those players might not play the game because the art style, and the people who do really like it are going to be even more drawn to the game, so you're building that niche audience, potentially bigger, but is it a big enough niche to start with? And we'll probably get there too. But yeah, no, it's one of those challenges. Like you want all the best stuff ends up being spiky and dangerous and on the edge of like, ooh, that was a risk to take. And yet, most of the time when you play on that edge, you fall off. So yeah.
expenses, a studio like Bungie, and a funder like PlayStation. The game itself has got many of the great classic Bungie things, the feel of clicking on heads, and it does seem to have real depth in the weapon and mod customization. But you may, of course, lose that gun that you customized mere seconds after acquiring it. So this is a game that knows exactly what it wants to be, and it actually is that game. And I'd want you to think about Concord, right? We have seen Concord's gritty sci-fi punk.
Does Marathon know what it wants to be? I think maybe. I think, again, it's made some tough calls and some risky plays. I still am not sure on that question of does it know what it wants to be? And that's not even a knock on Bungie or Marathon, like development team or anything. I think that's a hard thing to parse through before you ship the game. You want to try as hard as you can, and they clearly had a vision for something here, and they nailed a lot of elements of it. But I think if you were to convince someone there that like, oh, you should probably pivot slightly in this direction or that direction, if it felt like it was a really good move, they might not have as strong a like, yeah, but this is what we want the game to be. I could be wrong there. Maybe there is a really crisp, like, here's the clear game vision. I think the reason I wonder if it's not is because the 2024 apparently losing game director, that's new data for me, but that like, oh, okay, cool, then big shift there. And then last year when they had trouble with the game in early betas and stuff, and with some of the PR challenges, they were able to make pivots. They were able to change it. And I think when you have that super clear vision for the game, I mean, ideally it locks in over time. And again, I agree with the pivots. I just wonder if there was a little bit more flex. It wasn't as locked in as he implies. But, there's something spiky there.
Is that game. And I'd want you to think about Concord, right? We have seen Concord's gritty sci-fi punk concept art that looks really cool, and that, by the time of its launch, was practically all gone. Had all of its edges sanded away, and it was all made production-friendly. Marathon is not one of those games. It looks like its concept art, even down to its gameplay and its systems matching that edge. And the thing is, the people who are buying this game often do love it. The Steam user reviews are staggeringly positive, just short of 90% since launch. Imagine that, 90% for a game that many people kind of hate-watched as a spectator sport over the last, year. And even looking through the negative reviews, the largest complaints are about the lackluster pass, and even that has been addressed within a week by Bungie. So we're seeing great user reviews, and now that formal reviews are starting to land, they look fairly great too. It's of course not unusual for those formal reviews to be a little bit late for a live service game. It's the type of game where the community needs time to feel it out first. Of course, with this game, there is a little bit different, because Bungie actually asked reviewers to wait. They didn't do that because they were expecting some horrendous, hideous day one experience with loads of bugs and problems. Rather, they have something saved up for around the end of the month, and they think people should take that into account. It was a request, not a demand. It does kind of beg the question, is whatever they've got coming so cool, so big, that it could actually change the market size for this game? That's the question.
That is a big question. Probably not. Anything can happen. Probably not. You had your moment. I'd love to be wrong, but my guess is no. However, perhaps if it significantly boosts reviews or review scores of the game, maybe it does get you in a position to be in things like Game of the Year conversations and whatnot that would draw more people into your game much later, or hold on to the player base you have better. The idea of you getting a second upswing, dude, would love it if it happened. I would love it if they dropped something and I was just, me. I would just be like, oh, I'm in. I'm going to go back. I'm going to start playing it to the marathon. But I doubt it. It reminds me of, what was it? Splitgate 2 when they released, was it a BR mode or something? I don't remember the details, but they were like, that's going to revitalize the game. And it didn't. You had your moment. I think it did spike players for a bit for that game, but they just started falling off again. So anyway, let's see. I guess we'll find out.
Could actually change the market size for this game? That's the question. Why did I just say market size, even though I was talking about the qualitative sides of this game, not the quantitative? Well, there's a very good reason why. This game is a product, and it probably needs to be a commercial success. But right now, we don't know if it's a commercial success for Bungie. There have been no announcements of millions of sales, and the Steam player numbers launched at just under 90,000 concurrents. But the good thing is they haven't dropped that much since. They've been around 60k a week later, so it is not having some high guard style player retention problem. But the Steam review language breakdown actually tells a different story. In that we see 75% of reviews are in English. That suggests the game is mostly finding an English-speaking audience, meaning that there are a lot of global audiences that aren't turning up for this one. You can compare it with Slay the Spire. It's the current indie darling, and for that game, English reviews don't even hit 50%. Why do I bring this up? Well, I bring it up because you need a global launch to get a truly breakout level of success in the modern day and the modern games market. We've seen the reports, right, of like console sales not being as fast as people thought, of console like game sales and stuff basically flatlining. Well, a lot of the growth that has happened is from other regions. So if a game like this is basically just an Anglosphere game, well, it may do well in the Anglosphere, but that very much is not the totality of the modern games market. For a game as expensive as this, and a studio as expensive as Bungie, that's actually a problem. Now, modern...
Okay, go back to here. You do want your game to be as global as possible. There's a lot to factor in, though. What are player patterns and spend patterns around different regions of the world? How do they relate to the game? Who were you likely to get? I don't think... While obviously you want a lot of people all around the world playing your game, and that's the best, I think if you had a game that really took off in North America and parts of Europe, and it was English as first review language type of stuff, that doesn't mean you're losing. That doesn't necessarily mean it couldn't be a really big hit. So that review data is interesting. It's just not by itself as compelling as I think he's saying, like, well, they didn't get the global audience. And I go, well, how much did they want the global audience on this launch? I mean, again, you always want it, but were you targeting that? Did you do things to try to make that a reality? Or was the global audience more of a bonus and you were fine if this was a Western game audience thing and you just needed more people? Because if you're constantly trying to sell your game everywhere, you may sell it nowhere. And, you know, I know games that are trying to sell everywhere, and I wish them the best, and I don't think that's a bad idea. But I wouldn't necessarily say you can't be a big hit just because, oh, look, you know, 7% of the reviews are in English. That said, you do want it to be more global, and you can point to other products. But like pointing to Slay the Spire, there's, you know, apples to oranges types of comparisons between these two that I think you run amok of. So, anyway, I don't want to overstate that. I think he overstates it a little bit, that yes, you want a global game audience if you can get it. But also, there are games that if you just really crushed in only the United States or like only in Brazil or only in China, that could be a massive, very successful product with very little global footprint outside of, you know, a nation or two. So anyway, yeah, don't want to overstate it.
Well, it may do well in the Anglosphere, but that very much is not the totality of the modern games market. For a game as expensive as this, and a studio as expensive as Bungie, that's actually a problem. Now, there is the obvious thing. We can't see PlayStation or Xbox sales. I'll say that Paul Tassi's sources inside Bungie suggest that this is a predominantly PC-based audience, so that's likely relevant. We can kind of put together, then, that Marathon has sold, but it's probably not sold in massive numbers. And that's the kind of result that makes the next conversation we're going to have very uncomfortable, because good enough is just about the hardest outcome for a company to make a decision on. So Marathon is a game that spent ages in development. Basically, it's been in development since Bungie left Activision in one way or another. Now, it didn't necessarily have a full 300-person team for all that time. Absolutely not. Though we do know that it's in 2024 that the team did swell up to around 300 people. That is when Bungie leadership basically folded in staff from another cancelled project. Though we also know that following that, there were more layoffs. Now, Bungie did at least credit those devs in the final game, but that is still about 6 years of development for this game. Now, maybe the targets factored that in, like the sales targets. Maybe they accounted for the nicheness of this game. That would probably be wise, but historically, I think we all know that's not how C-suites tend to work, especially when they can maybe look at an arrowhead and think, can we have another Helldivers money, please? But the biggest problem for Bungie may not even be funding. It may actually be bandwidth, and that's because of Destiny 2. This is a game that seems to, be on life support every year, but just have things always get worse. It's like the life support is on life support for the life support that is Destiny 2's life support. That's how bad the narrative around this game has been. So here's what's going on. Its latest update has been delayed by 2 months. It was supposed to launch shortly after Marathon before someone over there maybe realized that would be a bad idea. They probably couldn't get all the content made, all the fixes done. So now it's coming out in June, and that's led to Destiny's player numbers dropping. And they really have dropped. On Steam, you're looking at like peaks of 10k now. That's for a game that used to be played in the hundreds of thousands. There's no new content, and that's on top of existing concerns about a lack of communication from that team. It's obvious that after the last few years of pain and cuts and layoffs, that Bungie were already struggling to run Destiny in a way that retained players. Now, though, they have to run Destiny and Marathon at the same time. And with the layoffs and restructuring that Bungie has been through, it is not clear they have the capacity to sustain both games.
Yeah, this is something I think worth looking at. I love to describe Destiny as a game that just seems like it's being called on life support every year. There's a lot of truth in that. And you can look at it as, is it just slowly getting worse? And, some of the numbers do point to that being true. It's hard for Steam numbers because I think Destiny may be much higher on the console side. But yeah, they're certainly probably indicative of something, a general trend. So you have Destiny. One of the other things that's kind of impressive about it is, despite the fact that it seems to endlessly be on life support, it's still going. Now, maybe that's because we're throwing good money after bad on this Bungie Sony side. And if so, this is where you can talk about what the expectations were for Marathon and say like, oh, maybe the C-suites were hoping for a Helldivers success or needed a Helldivers success. Well, they always are hoping for that. We're always hoping for that, but you have to go with what you've got. And in this case, they have Destiny and Marathon. And this is a serious problem because Bungie is not a small studio of 50 or 100 people. It is closer to 1,000, much closer to 1,000. And that's very, very expensive, especially because it's primarily based in the United States, in major gaming hubs, which all tend to be quite expensive. And so, my napkin math numbers are 20 to 25K per month per employee on average. That's not salary, but that's salary plus insurance plus facilities plus everything. Like let's just average it out to be about that. And when you look at that, that means if you've got 5 employees, you're running at 100K a month and 1.2 mil a year. Well, when you have 500 employees, do the math, right? This is very, very expensive. It's very, very difficult. And in their case, they have closer to 1,000 employees. So, you could easily be in the like burn rates of 200 mil or beyond. Plus, shooters have higher server costs generally. Now, some of that might be helped out by Sony on PlayStation, maybe. I don't exactly know how all that works, but I mean, in the end, you still have to, run servers, and first-person shooters require typically higher server ticks, better latency than, a game like like Hearthstone, right? Hearthstone, you could probably run the entire world on one server located in the US. My guess is they probably have 2, maybe 3, just to make it a little bit easier. But you don't need a fast server tick, anything like that. With shooters, you need a lot of those things to be in place. And that means that you need more servers in order to hit playable game in a broader part of the world, especially when you have PvP as such a core element, or even cooperative as a core element of what you're doing. So anyway, yeah, I think this idea of it's, obviously they can hire, if they have money, they can hire people and easily run 2 games. If they have money. If both of these games are struggling to bring in enough money, now we get into a serious problem of how do we invest in one or both and have that be something that is ROI positive for us long term. And that's a question that Bungie needs to answer, but also Sony needs to answer as the publisher owning Bungie.
He's been through. It is not clear they have the capacity to sustain both games. And if those player numbers stay soft, I think we know who's going to have to make some tough calls. PlayStation. They're the people who will have to make the decisions, and it certainly seems that right now they are making many decisions at Bungie. You see, Bungie's CEO left. Everyone expected that would happen because that's kind of when their various options from the acquisition came due, so they could just sort of take that, have a nice big bit of money, and then leave. But here's the deal, right? The role of CEO at Bungie was not replaced. If we're to read into that little bit, yeah, PlayStation's calling the shots at that studio. And now, PlayStation has a dilemma. Marathon has not failed. It's got a real audience. You can't just pull a Concord, write it off, and move on. Now, we don't know whether they expected Helldivers.
I'll just speak for a moment. You don't want to overread into anything, but they didn't appoint a new CEO after. Yeah, does that mean PlayStation or Sony's calling the shots? Maybe. How much do they know? How many of the shots do they get to call? And if PlayStation would there be an argument that would be justified? And this is, a tricky thing of, let's say your PlayStation, you acquire a studio for a ton of money, thinking that they're going to continue to perform. Well, they start performing worse than you expected. Then they release another thing. It doesn't do as well as you expected. You are now on the hook for trying to bring this thing to profitability or at least minimize damage. It makes sense that you might be more involved. So he could be right. Maybe Sony's diving in. It just, it's tough to say. Maybe they just went to a studio head model. And Bungie still retains quite a bit of autonomy internal. I don't know. I don't want to overread into it. And maybe we'll start seeing reports about it one way or the other from employees or employees that leave or whatever it is.
Concord, write it off and move on.
Yeah, definitely
now,
not a
we
Concord.
don't know whether they expected Helldivers level numbers for the game, but obviously if they did, they would be very disappointed. So, what do? Do they try to expand Marathon's total addressable audience, maybe by offering game modes that aren't as punishing, something like that? I'd say probably not, but also they can't do a Concord. If you're asking me, they'll probably just cut down costs in the game and keep it running. And whatever it is PlayStation does will matter beyond this one game. That's because PlayStation does still have a whole live service pipeline. There's Tokon, Fair Games, Horizon, Hunter's Gathering, then the ex-Bungie MOBA under Team LFG, and then there's the ex-Treyarch team over at Dark Outlaw Games. That's a whole bunch of studios, and most of them were revealed after the live service layoffs and cancellations started. So that's a whole lot of chips on a table where the house has not been kind. Now we know what Helldivers looks like in terms of long-term support. But Helldivers was a success that nobody saw coming, at least Arrowhead. Concord was a failure that most people did see coming. Both of them, though, are kind of anomalous. Everything else, including Marathon, lives in a mid-ground between them. And it's that middle ground where PlayStation's actual reputation gets built. So, if they cut down the Marathon team and basically just run the cheapest version of that game they can, I think we will all, read into that accordingly. If, though, they give Marathon all the support that it needs to be the best game that it can, maybe so that it could grow over time, well then, that would actually show us that PlayStation is committed to trying to mold their games into something that we'll all love. But there's a problem with that idealism. It is literally just hopium. It's saying, hey, spend many more millions, make all the players way more happy, it'll be great, it'll be successful. Whereas for the people actually making this call, they have the real, probably middling performance of Marathon to contend with. And as much as they, as humans, may think, wouldn't it be great if we could grow this game and give it more support? Ultimately, what they have to deal with is hard numbers. So if they see a certain amount of money coming in every month, and they look at a certain amount of money going out every month, they will, of course, try to balance those accordingly. And that is why many of us no longer trust live service games. Whatever happens to Marathon will be projected by the broad gaming audience onto every live service game that they put out next.
I think you can look at them individually, but it certainly will make people wary. And, there is the thing of precedent of what we did here. It makes sense to do here as well. I think overall I agree with his take, and I liked his balance in that take of, hey, on the one hand, you could throw a lot of money at Marathon and try to make it something and grow the player base and see if Bungie can turn it into another hit. They've made hits before that have been very successful and very profitable. Can we do that again? The I appreciate that he also calls out, man, that's a tougher call to make. There's always a bunch riding on this, and that's not just for Sony, that's for Bungie at both levels. They have to be asking a bunch of hard questions about this game, because if they shrink it down, put it on life support and try to make it profitable, but then they can't fund any of the rest of the studio, then Marathon is a failure. And, maybe it's you have to spend money to make money, but are they in a desperate spot? Yeah. How much will that play out on the rest of the live service catalog? I don't know. As he pointed out, Concord and Helldivers 2 are exceptions. Concord actually very rare to see just that little performance out of that much money. And Helldivers 2, actually the slightly more common one, because the upside of when something wins is much, much, much potentially higher than the downside of when something loses. All you can lose, well, you could lose brand reputation, other things, but pretty much like monetarily what you lose when a game completely flops is whatever you already invested into it. What you can gain is many times that. So, are you willing to keep taking risks, and what are the shape of those risks, and who's managing those risks? Anyway, I think he's got a good take here. I think we're towards the end, but I'll let him finish out. I think he's got a pretty good take here, more balanced than some of the other stuff. Appreciate this.
Onto every live service game that they put out next. This is the test case. It's not Helldivers, it's not Concord. It's just a normal game that came out with a normal-sized audience. It's good, but it's not a phenomenon. And how PlayStation supports a game like this will tell people everything they need to know about whether it's safe to invest their time and their money in the next live service that PlayStation comes to market with. Not all those upcoming games are going to be as artistic and as neat.
So he points out something here. One, I think he nailed it. Marathon is not an obvious success. It's also not an obvious failure. Unfortunately, given the context, it is not. I would lean towards saying it's probably perceived as a failure internal to Sony and potentially Bungie, even though it still is maintaining a decent player base. What do you do with middling success? Some people will notice this. I think actually the people that will notice this more than players will, because I don't think as many players as people think care that much about who the studio or the publisher was of the games that they play. They more just care, what are my friends playing and what seems interesting to me. I think developers and studios may be more hesitant and tricky around PlayStation, depending on how PlayStation responds to some of these things. Where you might say, oh, if you see any issues and you shut the game down, maybe I don't want to go with you as a publisher, versus like you give it a lot of support, that makes you more appealing. What's like the balanced path there? So there is a, what will other people think of what you do? What are the brand implications? But yeah, and he brings it up to the player. There are some players, and perhaps those players are the vocal minority, that tend to talk up, like they speak a lot. They are going to say like, you shouldn't buy this. It's a PlayStation live service game. Wait to see what happens, because if it doesn't go well, they're going to shut it down, which increases the chance of it not going well and being shut down. And, you can get into like vicious cycles there. So anyway, I think he calls out something here. I don't want to overstate it though.
PlayStation comes to market with. Not all those upcoming games are going to be as artistic and as niche as Marathon. Where's the pity, really? We could do with a bit more art alongside our live service. But if PlayStation cuts support now, why would anyone buy a live service game from them again? It would destroy any trust they might have built with that audience.
Again, because so many players just don't think about that. And I always worry that those of us who are in the industry and know a lot about who developed what and who's the publisher and all this different stuff, I wonder if I've outdated now and all players know this stuff. I don't think so. I think for the most part, players are just not that concerned about who makes their games, as long as they're good games and their friends are playing or reviewed well and it shows up on their Steam and they like, oh, that's interesting, and they try it or whatever it is. They aren't like, well, hang on, who made it? Let me make sure it's got nobody I don't like who made it. I don't think it's as bad. And in the same way that when people watch movies, they technically have the different companies, and they're the big ones that tend to make a lot of different movies, and then there are the little studios. And while you might know some of the little studios, and some people who are in the industry know who makes all of them, from like the Paramount side of things or the WB side of things, like the big companies, we just don't. Most people are not that aware of it outside of like, here was the movie and I thought the trailer looked cool, so I saw it. Or here was the movie and it reviewed well, so I went and saw it. Here was the movie and my friends told me I should see it, so I saw it. Just, if you're in the space, you think everybody has that information. Most people don't.
Them again. It would destroy any trust they might have built with that audience. So rather ironically, for a game called Marathon, PlayStation needs to not treat it as a sprint. And if they do, they could lose a hell of a lot more than just this one race. I don't have a good follow-up for that line. I really like how he ended it, so you know what? That's the situation with Marathon.
Yeah. Good video. Yeah, I think he calls out some stuff. I think he nails the sort of middle ground that Marathon seems to have landed in. Also calls out some of the complexities of what was Bungie supposed to do for Sony? How is Sony going to respond? How is Bungie going to respond? What does this mean for Bungie's burn rate versus the revenue that they're probably generating from their games? And the fact that if those things are out of whack, what does that mean overall? It's tough. It is tough. In a lot of ways, if I was a dev on Marathon, there's a lot of reason to be like happy. We got a game. We made it. It's niche. Has something special to it. There are more than 600 people that like it, that are playing it and enjoying it. There's actually thousands of people that are, engaging with this product at a $40 non-premium price point and really sinking their teeth into it. And we can continue to support and develop that. Like, it's pretty cool. Like, way to go. You're, in some ways you can say you won. And then on the other side, oh shoot, the context in which we define winning is actually not what we would normally define winning as. And perhaps that was somewhat predictable, but you've got to make bold plays. And my guess is there weren't a ton of options on the Bungie side. And so they made a call. Now they have this. It did okay. Players really seem to like it that play it. That's really great. There's a lot of those players, but there's a lot as a relative. There's a lot. There's a lot, and then there's also not a lot for what you were hoping for. So anyway, yeah, guess I'll wrap it there. Good take by Bellular News. I tend to focus on where I disagree, but I think this was a good one. If you enjoyed my takes, I talk about production, leadership, and game development. So yeah, check out more. Hit subscribe. Bye-bye. Did you enjoy this episode? If you did and are looking for more conversations like this one, join the Building Better Games Discord community. It's for leaders and producers in game dev who are frustrated with solving the wrong problems and who want to share experiences and learn how to lead and build better games. Check out the show notes to join. I'll see you there.